Hello, my name is Chandler Cruz, and I will be talking about complex coffee. So I want you to think of a scenario. I want you to think of the first time you went to your favorite coffee shop. Maybe you're like me and you love coffee. Um, but I want you to think of the first time you went to this coffee shop. And for me, the coffee shop that I like to go to, I just like to get a pour over. It has a great flavor. It has a good body, and it's just a good cup of coffee. Let's say I go to this coffee shop a second time, second day in a row, so they probably have the same beans, the same method, um, and I notice it has a much more bitter flavor, has a thicker body, and it's just not enjoyable. See, this is a very realistic occurrence because there are so many different factors that play into making a good cup of coffee, and if one of those things changes, it can totally affect the taste of the coffee that you get. So let's take a look at some of these factors that play a role into making a good cup of coffee. First, we have the method of brewing. There are so many different methods of brewing coffee. We'll take a look at some of those later on. But second, we have the temperature. This includes what temperature the water is at when we mix it with the grounds to brew the coffee. It also includes what temperature the beans are roasted at. What temperature the beans are roasted at is going to affect what flavor you can get out of the beans. So that's a very important factor to control. Going into what beans we're using and how they are roasted. What beans we're using, there are, according to Beth Mole, there are 60 different types of coffee beans. And there are different flavors associated with where they are grown and what the climate is, what the topography is. So these beans come from all over the world, and each region has a different flavor, has a different characteristic of bean, and how they are roasted affects the flavor. So that's a pretty important factor. Next, we have our ratio, and this is going to be how much water we use to how much coffee we use. So a pretty common ratio is 1 gram of coffee for every 16 grams of water, and then 320 grams of water, so around 20 grams of coffee. That's a pretty standard measurement for the pour over. And for coffee all across the board, a 1:16 ratio is a pretty standard ratio. But if you go over, say you go to a 1:18 ratio, you're going to have more water, which is going to dilute the flavor a little bit, which is going to make it a little lighter. On the other hand, you could make it stronger and a little bit bolder if you took it down to maybe a 1:14 ratio or 1:15 ratio. Lastly, we have time. Time is a huge factor when brewing coffee. If you brew the coffee too long, it's going to be over-extracted. It's going to have a thicker body. It's going to be very chocolatey, very caramely, maybe a little bitter, and it's going to be bolder for sure. And if you under-extract it, if you don't let the coffee brew long enough, then you're going to get an under-extracted blend, and it's going to be a little tea-like. It's going to be probably a little more citrusy, and it's going to have a lot more of the citric acid as opposed to the chocolatey, caramely flavors. So it's important how long we brew the coffee. So yeah, those are some factors that play into what your coffee is going to taste like. And you can see here, I included a picture of the grind size, and the grind size is also an important factor because each brew method has a different grind size requirement to get the best flavor. So we have coarse to fine. So for example, a French press is going to be very coarse, and an espresso shot is going to be very fine. So that's another factor to take into account when brewing your coffee. Next, we have our methods. So these are a few different methods of brewing coffee. First, we have our espresso. This is a very small amount of coffee. I'm sure you are familiar with an espresso shot. It's a very small, very concentrated amount of coffee. Next, we have our cold brew. This is a method that has grown very popular over the past 4 to 5 years in many coffee shops. And in some coffee shops, it has replaced espresso altogether, and they have cold brew based coffee. So this is a method that is brewed over 12 to 24 hours based on how much you're brewing. But it is a very concentrated, very different flavor of coffee. So this is a very interesting method of brewing coffee. Next, we have our V60 or Chemex pour over. This is going to be a very complex, very difficult method of brewing coffee. It is totally manual. There's not really a lot that the pour over does for you. We have our picture of a Chemex included. So this is going to be a very difficult method of brewing coffee, but it does give you a very complex flavor, and it does extract a lot that other machines do not. The AeroPress is going to be one of the most popular in America. It was actually created by a Stanford professor, a college professor. And it has grown in popularity, and many have said that it is most like an Italian classic cafe cup of coffee. Next, we have our French press. This is going to be similar to the cold brew in the sense that the grounds sit in the water and they kind of brew, but it is with hot water. So this is pretty popular. It's not. It doesn't have the best reputation for a great cup of coffee, but it is pretty popular. And last, we have the siphon, which is more for looks than anything. It is very similar to the French press style, but it just looks really cool. It looks pretty Breaking Bad, so a lot of people like the siphon. So those are the different methods. Some of the pros and cons of these methods. The espresso machine is very expensive. A good espresso machine can range from $500 to $8,000 for a single semi-automatic espresso machine. And there are many different parts to it. It's going to be the most expensive method of brewing coffee. It can be very consistent, and it can be very, very good. And you can also make different drinks with it, such as lattes, macchiatos, cappuccinos, but it is very expensive. Cold brew. Cold brew takes a very long time to brew, which is a con. However, it does have a higher concentration, so it lasts for longer because you dilute it with water. And it also has a different flavor that many people like. A lot of people don't like black coffee, and they like cold brew. So that's a pro of the cold brew, is a flavor difference, which is to benefit some people. Thirdly, we have the pour over. The pour over is very cost effective. It is not very pricey at all. However, it is very hard to dial in. It does take a lot of repetition, and it takes a lot of different tweaks to get it really dialed in, which can be super fun for some people and very not fun for other people who are not meticulous. And next, we have the AeroPress. Like I said, the AeroPress is very popular. It's grown in popularity recently. It's portable, which is awesome. It is about this big. It's very portable, and it makes a great cup of coffee. And like I said earlier, some people even say that it is the closest thing to a classic cup of coffee in Italy. Next, we have the French press, which is a very quick cup of coffee. It's very easy to make. You pour the grounds in, and you let it brew. Many people use this because it's easy to use, and they can use it with pre-ground coffee. So this is a very common, popular cup, but it does not create a very complex flavor. It is just a very simple brew method. Lastly, we have our siphon, which is similar to a French press, where the grounds are mixed in with the hot water. And then the water goes up a spout, which is vacuum sealed, and brews, and then comes back down, which brews the coffee. So the siphon, like I said, very similar to the French press, does not have that great of a flavor looking at the comparison to a pour over or an espresso shot, but it does have a cool ambiance, and it does have a cool effect. And these are my references. Thank you.